21% of U.S. adults age 50 plus, that's about 24 million people, now live alone without a spouse or a partner or anyone else under the same roof. And their numbers are growing fast. Sara Zeff Geber, today's guest, has been writing and speaking about solo aging for more than 10 years. She's witnessed friends support their aging parents and all that entails, and she's acutely aware of the number of people who choose to live alone for any number of reasons: freedom, independence, post-divorce. So what's fueling this surge in the number of solo agers? What do they need to do to be prepared for their future? Sara, welcome to Older Women and Friends. So I'm very curious to know your current definition of a solo ager and how that may have changed over the years.
Sure. Well, when I first started, I considered anyone who didn't have children, married or single, to be a solo ager, period. End of subject. Because that's what I observed from my own life and from the life of my friends. That's where the biggest opportunity was, or the biggest need. I started talking about solo aging, and so many people came up to me and said, well, I consider myself a solo ager, but I have a grown son and he lives in Denmark. I consider myself a solo ager. Or the other popular scenario, I have 2 kids. I haven't spoken to either of them in 15 years. So I changed my definition, and now I consider anyone who doesn't have kids or doesn't anticipate having any family support as they get older to be solo agers. So that's my current definition.
Okay. And so people want to know, so are you a solo ager?
Yes, I'm a solo ager. I don't have children. I am married. My husband and I, neither of us have children. And so we consider ourselves solo agers because unless we get hit by the same bus on the same day, one of us is going to go first. And the other one needs to be well set up with a good plan going forward for the rest of his or her life.
Makes good sense. I have read, and of course you're the expert on this, that there's been an incredible upswing in the number of solo agers living right now in the United States. I'm just reading my notes, and ostensibly, according to the 2021 census, there are 22.1 million solo agers in the 55-plus range. And there are 24 million approximately in the 50-plus range. So we're talking about a lot of people. And to what do you attribute this explosion?
Well, we can look back in history to find the roots of that. And those of us who are baby boomers know that there was a tremendous amount of change going on in the late 60s and throughout the 70s. And one of those changes was the push by women to pass the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. Well, even though it never passed, the effects of that activism on Congress, especially, but also on education and on big corporations, the pressure to engage more women, to employ more women, to bring more women into higher education. Women all of a sudden could go to prestigious colleges and universities they had never been able to go to before, and able to work in professions that they had never even been able to consider before. So all of a sudden, these doors were just sprung wide for women, and the women rushed in, and I was one of them. And I took the opportunity to get a really good education. I did a lot of different things over the course of my life, and I never needed to have a husband to survive. And that's what made the change. Women no longer needed a husband for their very survival. So they were able to choose to not marry or choose to unmarry or divorce if things didn't work out without fearing that they would die of starvation. So that's the biggest change. That I also consider something that I've named the family diaspora as being another big cause. And so in the last 15, 20 years, people have been able to move all over the country and have in fact been asked by their employers to move all over the country and all over the world for their jobs. And they've done so. So just like I have several neighbors who I'm very friendly with, and all three of them that I'm thinking of they're all married. They all have adult children who are in their 30s, some in their 40s, and they live some of them halfway around the globe. Certainly not within driving distance of mom and dad. So that's evidence of this family diaspora. And they're on wonderful terms with their kids. They have Zoom calls. They do all kinds of things to make the distance seem less so. But I'm afraid it is so in terms of will they be there in an emergency when the crisis happens.
Interesting. And just one quick question on this subject, and is there any sign of this trend slowing down, or do you think this is the fact that there are more and more solo agers, that is going to continue to increase that number?
I think it shows no signs of slowing down. There's been a number of studies of younger people, and I forget the names of the generations. I know the boomers and adults and millennials, and then there's something beyond the millennials that I don't know. But they're having fewer kids. And, we're kind of at what a lot of us consider a pretty horrible time in our country, and wanting to bring kids into a world and a country like this is not very appealing. So unlike the generation before them, the Xers had quite a number of kids. They're just a small generation themselves. And the millennials had kids, but the younger people today, when they're polled, younger people meaning in their 20s and early 30s, they're not so much interested in kids or marriage. So
things are changing. I think I remember that from a lyric of, I don't know, a Bob Dylan song or something, because the
minds there are changing.
Yeah, that's right. Anything else that you can think of that might have led? When I Googled all of this, they kept saying, this is an explosion, the number, and of course the AARP bulletin for I think it's December issue of 2025 is about solo aging. So it's and I believe, and you probably know better than I, that they had done some extensive research and polling, and anything that they discovered that surprised you or that verified something you'd been thinking about but nobody was really talking about?
Not that I can think of. I pretty much stay on top of the research that they're doing and that Mather Institute and Pew and some others are doing. So I'm pretty well aware of what was going on. I was happy that they asked me to write an article in that edition, and it was all about the planning, the things that solo agers need to do to plan, because that's been the gist of my message all along, is you need to plan. And there are people who are planners and people who aren't, and people who look at me and say, you make plans and God laughs, and I all those expressions. Like, okay, if you believe that, fine. Yes, things do change. I know my husband and I have updated our estate plan, not several times. And I think everybody needs to do that every 5 to 10 years, because some of the people you name as being responsible for things in your life after you can't, they may have predeceased you. One of my proxies, unfortunately, died of cancer, and it's one of the reasons we had to change the estate plan. But things happen. People move. People die. Things change.
Well, before we get to the planning, because I know that you're an expert and I do want to hear what you have to say, after having read the piece in the AARP Bulletin, I wonder what are some of the takeaways you have, or that this just verified, reasons why a lot of people are choosing to be a solo ager. It's not necessarily because they would have to, but their life circumstances change and they're finding themselves as older men and women, and they're alone and they are, I guess, choosing to keep it that way. What are some of the positives of being a solo ager?
Well, I was very happy to see that AARP put a positive spin on solo aging. I like that. I believe I put a positive spin on it whenever I write or speak. I don't like to. It's one of the reasons that I chose solo aging as the name for the phenomenon I was talking about, because before that time, the only term, which my friend Carol picked up for the Facebook group, was elder orphan.
That's horrible. That's just horrible.
I couldn't live with that. And so I like the positive spin. I'm sure, Jane, that you and I both know people, women especially, who have enjoyed being on their own, and they don't intend to abandon that. And that's all well and good when you're in your 60s and mostly in your 70s and into your 80s. But I do believe that people need community. So that's the thing that scares me when I hear people say, well, I like living alone. I'm just going to continue. I'm just going to age in place here in my little house. Well, that might not work so well for you. So I encourage people to really think about the long game.
Which is, and if you're a little younger, like in your 60s, I don't remember having spent much time at all in terms of thinking about being much older and the kind of living situation that I preferred. Now, I remember, or from reading that piece, there were people who said they crave the freedom that being a solo ager gives to them, that they enjoy the flexibility, that they have more time to spend socially with friends than if they were living either with an adult child or a spouse or partner. Am I missing anything? So these people are saying, I love being by myself. It's great. And are there any other reasons why somebody would intentionally opt to be a solo ager, super ager too?
You don't opt to be a solo ager. You either are or you aren't. Now, you can opt in and out of living solo, but you either are or you aren't a solo ager.
According to your definition, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there was a little side note. I just wanted you to verify this. And it said that older men are twice as likely to get out of a solo aging situation and remarry or live with somebody versus women. Is that something your research has found as well?
Only by observation. My perspective on older men is that they are mostly devastated if they lose a spouse, and I mean devastated beyond what women experience, and will quickly remarry or quickly re-engage with another person, because that the idea of living alone, which they usually are when their spouse dies, they live alone and they have fewer innate resources than women to how do they fix that problem? Women reach out to other women, men not so much. Here in California, I've discovered there's a men's group. It has a weird name. It's called Sons in Retirement, SIRS. And there's many chapters all over the state.
Really?
It's a group of men that get together once a month and have meetings. They have speakers. That's why I know they exist. I was asked to be a speaker at one of their meetings, and I was thrilled to death to be able to speak to a group of men. Because generally when people ask me to come and speak to a village, especially villages that are just forming, I do a lot of speaking at senior living communities for much in their marketing efforts, because when I talk about solo aging, people realize they need a community.
Right.
But it's predominantly women in the room. The men are often, not always, certainly not always, but I would say 60%, they are brought there by their wives. Or your friend.
Right. You will come with me tonight. Yes.
Men are just typically a different mentality around this.
We could do an entire year around that topic, but
yeah, we could. And they're not all the same. Obviously, some men are much more proactive than women. Lots of older men who've lost wives find that living in a senior community is a great antidote to the loneliness that they're experiencing. So I don't know, I got off on some tangent beyond what you asked.
No, I set you up on the male versus female percentages of remarrying after the loss of a spouse, either through death or a divorce or something else. Now, I'm reading my little notes here, because in that same article that we're talking about, it said, or was addressing the issue of what are some of the upsides of being a solo ager. And it says that they're generally healthier, more cognitively capable, more socially connected. And I'm reading that and I'm thinking, well, hey, then the rest of us have the wrong idea. Those are all some very significant positives. How do you square that then with some of the cons, the downsides, when it comes to being a solo ager?
Well, let me say first that AARP markets their efforts, and when they survey people, they survey their entire readership, as many as will respond. And remember that starts at age 50.
Oh, yeah.
Which,
I don't know, it's like, come on, guys.
So a lot of the responses that they got, I think, are skewed by the fact that their respondents are so much younger. And I have found that it is next to impossible to put ourselves into our 95-year-old bodies, should we live that long, and have any clue about what we'll want or what we'll need. I think it's almost impossible. I've discovered, people believe that they're just going to age in the same mind and body that they have when they're 60 or 65.
We can tell them that's not the case.
No, it's not the case. Just because they want to live alone now and have ultimate choice and freedom, and God, I love this independence, that's the independence of and joy of a single person who's in their 50s, 60s, 70s, gets a little iffy, 80s gets much iffier, but I believe it was skewed a bit by age. So that's just my observation. I didn't do the research. I have tremendous admiration for AARP and the research that they do. But just like, did you know that they have a different version of the magazine depending on your age?
I might have known that, but I'm not sure. I mean, I know they've got the bulletin, they've got the glossy magazine. Oh, well, that's very interesting. So at least there's a recognition on their part that different age groups have different needs and, need different information. But when they collated that whole thing, and I'm reading that article and I'm thinking, okay, great. If I happen to end up, well, I'm not going to be, but, if I were, then look at all these great things. And so it's not something that I should be nervous about or that I should dread in any way, shape, or form. So that's really fascinating. So they break down all of their information according to age groups.
Well, it may only differ in the advertising. But I'm not sure. I have gotten to know one of the editors there, during the time I was writing that article for the bulletin. And I think I'm going to send him an email and ask him, because I've heard that for years. I believe it. It makes sense to me, but I haven't heard it from the horse's mouth. So
wow. Well, let me know, because that's because you're throwing around the words of freedom and independence and autonomy and do whatever you want whenever you want it, and it sounds idyllic. And I agree that there are things that happen beyond that are not so idyllic. Well, let's turn to the whole issue of planning, and we've touched upon it already, but can I assume that we're talking about physical planning and legal planning and financial planning? And I'm sure people are like going, oh no, do I have to think about that again? But I think I read something that you said is one of the keys is to get going early on making all those decisions. Do I have that right?
Sure. I mean, that just is common sense, right? You want to do it before the crisis hits. And if you do it in your 60s and you don't have a crisis until you're 98 years old, well, you've probably revised the plan a few times. But I say this a lot, and I just think I can't say it too much. Most people believe that they're going to die after a great day hiking or on the football court or whatever it is, and a fabulous dinner, and they just don't wake up the next morning. That's what most people see in their future.
That's a righteous, that is what they call a righteous death, that if you can just die in your sleep. The question is, and you're getting to that now, how often is that going to happen? How many people are going to be lucky enough to experience that kind of death?
Yeah, not very many. Over 70% of us are going to need some aid in our activities of daily living, and most of you know what those are. It's bathing and dressing and grooming and toileting and transferring. We're going to need some help with those activities at some point in our older life. Maybe it's just help after a knee replacement. But I've watched a friend of mine who is single, has been single a long time, lives by herself, does great. She's my age. We're both in our mid-70s. And she had a hip replacement recently. And I went down to her area and stayed at her house for 5 days to help her. And then some other people came in behind me. If you don't have that kind of a social network for people to come in, those periods of time when you're aging and you need some assistance, you need to think about that ahead of time. I mean, she considered all kinds of different things, including going into a rehab hospital for a couple weeks, where they would have fed her and worked with her on her PT. It would have been justified because she lives alone. But because she had a really robust social network, she didn't need to do that. So, that really doesn't get into the planning so much, but it does a little bit, because I think we all need to build a support system around us, a social network. That's one of the planning elements. I look at planning as kind of a three-legged stool. There's the financial, there's the legal, and then there's the social. So plan socially to live in a connected way. Now, this same friend and I and my husband are at some point in a few years going to be moving into a continuing care retirement community. We've made the decision. We've put our deposits down. That's what I believe is the way I will be best able to live out the rest of my life. And my husband, fortunately, is in agreement. And I'll have tons of independence. I mean, what a lot of people believe is that they won't have enough independence if they move into a senior community. And if they'll take the time to really explore them, they'll find that that's just not the case at all, that you'll have a lot of independence. So anyway, back to the planning. I think that most people should spend at least an hour with a financial advisor. You pay them. You want a financial advisor that is going to be paid by the hour or by some kind of a fee. Right. Most financial advisors do work that way now. So you need to understand your own finances, and a lot of people don't. They don't really have a handle on how much money they go through every month and whether that money will last the rest of their lives. So determining how their money is going to last and whether there are lifestyle changes they need to make for it to last and what they'll do if and when it runs out. These are big planning decisions. Sometimes that planning involves planning for getting onto Medicaid. We all hope that's not the case, but I have many family members actually who will be going on Medicaid.
Simply because they cannot afford...
They cannot afford their own lives as they get older. But that's part of the planning. The financial planning is really understanding where you are with regard to your life. Maybe you need to live in a less expensive environment. I have told a number of people over the years, and I'm in California, so it makes a difference. I live in a very expensive area.
Yep.
And when people ask me, people in this area say, well, I don't know how I'm going to afford to live the rest of my life. And I say, you know what? There's life outside of California. There's life outside of the Bay Area. There's life outside of the U.S. I know hundreds of people who are retired and living very happily on their Social Security and whatever pension they may have. But Social Security alone will do it. If you lived some places in Mexico, I like Mexico because it's close and I just like Mexico. But there are places in Central America like Costa Rica that are perfectly safe and wonderful. They have good medical care. So does Mexico, by the way. Or some people are moving all the way to Portugal or Thailand. So if you can't afford to live the rest of your life, you need to do one of two things. Either plan legally to get onto Medicaid, and there is some legal planning involved in that, or you need to move to an area where you can live for the rest of your life on the money you have. That's a really cold, hard fact.
I know that in your work you have visited a gazillion different senior living communities, etc. And I think I heard or read that you said something about the importance of what do we call them? The tenants, that those adults need to be intimately involved in the planning of everything that's going on and in their own lives. And I wonder if you can just speak quickly about that as being crucially important. Why does it matter whether I and a few other people that were living together make decisions about, I don't know, the weekly menu or things that are much more important than that?
There are communities that are set up, and more all the time are being developed, that are set up for what they call the middle market. People who could not afford a life plan community with a buy-in of several $100,000, but they could come in at a lower cost and be part of the community and share some of the tasks that need to be done. Maybe some of the cooking, maybe some of the maintenance around the grounds, so that it's not all paid people that do that for you. There's all kinds of different ideas and different experiments going on with regard to community. I'm a big fan of co-housing. That's where a group of people come together and develop a community together. Sometimes it can reside in an old multi-unit facility, like an old motel or something, but usually they build one. They hire an architect and a builder, and they build what looks essentially like a condominium complex. But they run it themselves, and it's considered co-housing. Legally, it doesn't really differ much from a condominium, but they make all the decisions about the property. They make them jointly. They get together for meals 3 or 4 times a week. Let's call it an intentional community, meaning they intentionally run it almost as though they were family. And I know one elder co-housing community that I've known most of the people there for about 10 or 15 years. And they recently got wanted to get pretty aggressive about their planning for lay life because they had lost a couple members. Oh. One needed some additional help, and nobody knew where they were going to get it. So now that's been determined that everyone shall have an advocate. So everyone in the community has someone else in the community that's their advocate. Oh. If they have a crisis and go to the hospital or whatever it is, that person is on their advance directive. If they have kids around in the area, then the kids are on the advance directive too. But the first line of defense, so to speak, is that advocate in their community. So I have great admiration for that.
So it just sounds, as you said, that there are multiple opportunities to find a community that works best for you in terms of your personality, in terms of your finances, in terms of your aging. And I think I feel like I better get off the phone right now and get going because I haven't done my due diligence in that order. We could continue to talk forever, I know, but sadly there is some kind of deadline in all of this. So I want to thank you so much for being my guest today and helping to sort all of this out. And hopefully any people listening who are social, I keep doing that, solo agers are living happy, healthy, and planned lives. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Jane. I really appreciated the invitation and appreciate getting to know you a little bit.
Thank you. Aging with Purpose and Passion is the acclaimed weekly podcast hosted by Beverly Glazer, M.A., transition coach and psychotherapist. Each episode features insightful and entertaining guest interviews to empower women in midlife and beyond to rediscover their strength, their resilience, and potential, one motivating story at a time. You can listen to my friend's podcast at reinventimpossible.com.